Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video we are going to be continuing to talk about fantasy football and going through every single team alphabetically. Today we will be going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars got a lot of new pieces on the team this year that I want to talk about, as well as one of the biggest fantasy football sleepers of the year, which is above. All right, that's a joke. He's not one of the biggest sleepers. You don't want to be drafting him. But I will talk about Tim Tebow in a little bit, so we'll get to that as well. But anyway, if you're interested in content like this on my channel, please consider checking it out. I have every team listed alphabetically before Jacksonville. I've already made a video on. I'm doing this about every single position player to help you win a fantasy football championship this year. And I also have a lot of other content on my channel as well. So if you want to check that too, I make song covers, I make song reactions. I've mostly been reacting to Tool, but I react to some other stuff as well from time to time. And then I also like talking about other variety of topics like NBA. I want to do some more like teaching educational type videos from some of my classes that I've taken in the past, things like that. So if you're interested in all that stuff, please let me know and consider commenting, or subscribing to this channel. So we will move to the Jacksonville Jaguars now, and I start all these videos with their schedule to get an idea of when these players will perform well and might perform poorly based on the matchups. And the takeaway with the Jacksonville Jaguars is that they actually have a very favorable start to the schedule with the defensive matchups they have. So potential to sell high on these players. Granted, a lot of this is going to depend on how their offense looks. You've got a new coach, new quarterback, all that. So it could take some time, but the defenses that they have early on, week one, they've got the Houston Texans. They do not project to be a good defense at all. Denver and Arizona are the teams the next 2 weeks, which those teams are probably middle of the pack. Arizona looks to be improving. Denver is more on the decline, in my opinion, but could potentially be good matchups there. And then week 4 and 5, they've got great matchups against Civ defenses in Cincinnati and Tennessee. So my takeaway is that the first 5 weeks of the season, the Jaguars might have some pretty good statistics for you, and you might want to consider selling them by the time they get around to their bye week, week 7, because their middle stretch of the season is a lot tougher. They've got Buffalo, Indianapolis, San Francisco, and Los Angeles in 4 out of 5 weeks. So that's a pretty tough stretch. So take advantage of these guys early, but then there's also a pretty favorable stretch towards the end from week 14 to 16, where they play Tennessee again, Houston again, and the New York Jets, which are all bad defenses. So it's kind of a little bit up and down, but there is a pattern of when they might be having good matchups versus bad matchups based on their schedule. It's not mismatched like playing good defense and bad defense. It's all relatively in a line, which can work to your advantage if you can utilize their performance stock appropriately in trades. So before we get to the position players, I just want to talk the new offense and what the team might look like since they have a new coach, Urban Meyer. So in my opinion, I think that this team is going to have a good offense, but their defense is going to be terrible. That's kind of how it was last year, except the offense was not up to standard and the defense was so bad that it just took them out of most of the games they were in. But I think Trevor Lawrence he looks to be a potential franchise quarterback, potential Hall of Fame type of quarterback if he plays up to his potential. So he has an opportunity to really put together a good offense here, and we'll see how it goes. But a lot of it is going to depend on if Urban Meyer can adjust this offense to the pro system. He's never been a pro coach before in the head coaching level, so we'll see if he can replicate it. But I have a feeling that he will. So now we move to the position players, and we start first and foremost with the number 1 draft pick, Trevor Lawrence. So I personally think Trevor Lawrence is going to be very good in the NFL, and I think he's actually got pretty good value in fantasy football too. A lot of people, almost everybody knows who he is, but since he hasn't played in the NFL and he's he's got a lot of other quarterbacks that he's competed against, or that he's got to compete against for starting quarterback positions that are going to be taken a lot higher. You could get Trevor Lawrence, I think, for pretty good value in the fantasy football drafts this year. So I do foresee what's going to happen is that I don't think the Jaguars as a team are going to necessarily be very good, but I think what this means is that Trevor Lawrence has a good opportunity to pick up a lot of garbage time stats at the end of games to pad his stats while they're coming from behind, passing the ball, kind of similar to what Joe Burrow had to do in Cincinnati. In a way, this is almost similar to kind of how it was like with Blake Bortles in Jacksonville for a few years before he really kind of developed his bad reputation. And I'm not by any means comparing Trevor Lawrence to Blake Bortles because I think he will be a lot better than Blake. However, I think there is going to be a similar fantasy projection where a lot of these, he could potentially get a lot of stats like Bortles did in his early career, just coming from behind and trying to pass to catch up. Yeah, so I think that's going to potentially be something to look out for with this Jaguars team. And Lawrence also is a pretty good runner too, so I could see him potentially getting some running touchdowns. He's got the mobility to pick up some yards as well, so it could be very good value for you. It's going to be interesting to see where he goes in drafts, but I think if you were in a position where you're waiting on a quarterback and trying to stock up on some receivers and running backs for the first few rounds first, get a guy later on, I would not have a problem with holding off and waiting until Trevor Lawrence is available. I think that could be a very good move for savvy fantasy owners. Other quarterbacks of note, Gardner Minshew, who a fan favorite of like people that enjoy the trailer culture and things like that. I'm not trying to make fun of any of you guys or anything, but Gardner Minshew was quite a character that seemed to fit in well with Jacksonville. But I don't think he's going to be fantasy relevant at all this year unless Trevor Lawrence gets hurt for some reason. So yeah, we'll move to the running backs. And things start to get a little bit interesting here because if you remember last year, Jacksonville got a pleasant surprise at their running back position with James Robinson. But they also drafted Travis Etienne. So how is this going to look between the two of them? And I'm going to start with James Robinson first just because he's the guy that's got the year of longevity on his team. So if you remember, Jaguars originally were going to roll out Leonard Fournette as their running back. He didn't want to be on the team anymore. I believe they cut him, and then he went to Tampa Bay and won the Super Bowl. They were going to go with Raquel Armistead, but he had a lot of issues with COVID, and then his backup also got injured. So they had to go all the way down to undrafted rookie free agent James Robinson. And he took advantage of his opportunity and played pretty well. So James Robinson, the end of the year, he finished as, in PPR formats, the number 7 running back. He had 240 rush attempts, over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. He also had 49 receptions. So he got a good amount of volume. But my fear with him is that he took advantage of a situation where he put up a lot of stats because they didn't have a lot of options on that team, and he was one of the few consistent options they had. And some stats kind of tell the tale that potentially his efficiency is a little bit in question too, because he was the number 7 running back, but he was also one of the running backs that played the full season. There were a lot of running backs that got hurt and weren't able to be up at the top of the standings, so they probably would have been, like Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, etc. So that, I believe, hurt it elevated the stock of James Robinson more than probably what he actually did. And then also his yards per carry. He had 4.5 yards per carry, which ranked only 25th among running backs last year. And yes, this does vary based on the number of attempts, but it's not like he was necessarily breaking out and had a huge explosive performance all the time. It was kind of more, he got a lot of volume, he took advantage of it, and he ended up as one of the better running backs in the league because of it. So, unfortunately, with Travis Etienne, he's a more explosive player, and he's also got chemistry with Trevor Lawrence from Clemson. So, I feel that what's going to end up happening is that this is going to be more of a committee. So Travis Etienne, I looked at his stats in Clemson, and he got a lot better as a pass catcher. His freshman season, he only had 5 receptions, didn't have a touchdown, but then his senior season, he had 48 catches, 588 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And he also rushed for 914 yards, 14 touchdowns on 5.4 a carry. So this shows that he's potentially a little more explosive than James Robinson was. So what I think could potentially happen is that James Robinson could kind of fill more of that early down back role, potentially even a goal line back role, and Travis Etienne for now is kind of more of a third down running back. So it's but what's also important is that James Robinson got a lot of his yards either in situations where they were coming from behind, or he was getting it off just steady performance. So if they end up in a game script where they're behind, they've got to throw a lot, it's going to end up potentially being more games for James Robinson where he doesn't necessarily put up numbers that Travis Etienne will. So I go into depth about both of these because I think both of them could be good players, but I'm a little hesitant about both. But I would prefer to take Travis Etienne based on the upside that he has. But again, it'd be interesting to see how this develops as the season goes along. Other running backs they have on their team, they got Carlos Hyde from Seattle. Carlos Hyde, in my opinion, is pretty much past his prime and kind of getting towards the tail end of his career. I don't really see him making much of an impact at all unless one of the 2 guys that I already mentioned get hurt. And then they've also got Darian Gumbawale, who I thought would have had a bigger role last year as a pass catcher, but they 100% relied upon James Robinson, and he took advantage as being the workhorse back that they could consistently rely upon. So given that they have more running backs now, Darian Gumbawale is not going to be in the picture for me at all. Wide receivers. So Jaguars have some pretty decent wide receiver options, and I think this could potentially look good with Trevor Lawrence at the helm. So we start with DJ Chark Jr. He's listed as their top wide receiver. DJ Chark had some injuries last year, so didn't necessarily perform as well as he might have been anticipated to, but in 2019, he really had a breakout year and was very successful with Gardner Minshew. So my takeaway is that DJ Chark he's still a relatively young player. I believe he's only he is 24 years old, so he's still pretty young. He's got a lot of future potential ahead of him. So I think he could be a solid receiver for the Jaguars, and a lot of people are kind of sleeping on him because he's a good receiver, but he's not well known. So potentially great value for you. I really like DJ Chark as a guy that you can grab as a sneaker, middle of the draft. Could be a good receiver that you can play in the wide receiver 2 flex role and get some good stream matchups from. Other guys that they've got, so they've got Laviska Shenault is another player that they've had on the team from last year, and he showed a lot of promise as the year went along too. He's kind of more of a fast receiver that they put in the slot. Played well down the stretch, and particularly in the last game of the season, he put up some very good numbers. He's going to have opportunity, I think, with Trevor Lawrence as well. And again, I think he's another guy that has got a lot of potential that could have a breakout year with a better quarterback play. So we'll see how it goes for him as well. But I like the prospects of Laviska Shenault too going into this next season. And then they also signed Marvin Jones from Detroit. Marvin Jones is a little bit older, not necessarily the same player as he was in the past, but another guy that he's got some experience. He's got some decent size and ability to put up productive games at times. Could be a good player for you. But again, in my opinion, I would much rather go with guys like Chark and Shenault than Marvin Jones Jr. on this team. Other players that they have in mind, or that they have of importance that I want to bring up on their team, Phillip Dorsett is coming over from he was with the New England Patriots in the past. He could be a good player, but I don't necessarily see him getting the volume that's going to make him a particularly effective player. So that's important to keep an eye on. In the draft, they picked up Jalen Camp, a 6th-round pick. He could have potential to kind of sneak into that system as well as one of the late-round receivers, because they do need some back-end receivers in the 4th and 5th positions to step up. Potentially, Jalen Camp could be a guy to do that. He's kind of a bigger receiver at 6'2", 220. Could be a good possession guy that they can rely upon, and could be pretty productive for you as well, too. Not a guy that you draft this time, but just somebody maybe keep an eye on, because I would not be surprised if some of these lower drafted rookies get an opportunity to play and be successful with this team. So tight ends. So the tight end that is listed as number 1 on their depth chart is Chris Manhertz. And he, gonna be honest, it's not somebody that I'm really looking at all. To me, the Jaguars tight ends are more of blocking scheme guys. Other tight ends they have of note are James OShaugnessy, who's had some productive years in the past, but is generally not exactly a standout player. And then Luke Farrell is another tight end that they just drafted from Ohio State, who's got that connection with Urban Meyer. So maybe Luke Farrell could be the guy to kind of step up of these 3 tight ends, but to be honest, I'm generally not looking at Jaguars tight ends. And then the one guy that I want to bring up is Tim Tebow. And I'm just telling you right now, I don't think it makes any sense to draft Tim Tebow in fantasy football. And personally, I like Tim Tebow. I'm a Christian, and he is too, and I really respect him as a player for what he does to spread the word, be a model citizen, be somebody that is just a good example of never quitting on your dreams and ambitions. Played football, played baseball, now he's back in football. I really respect him for that, and I respect him for being a good Christian. But realistically speaking, I do not see him being fantasy football relevant at all. And I know that there's people that are going to be drafting him, and I feel like a lot of these people are probably just going to be more trolls than anything. But he is a guy that should not be drafted at all. And if he is going to be somebody that you have on your roster, it's by stream situations only, and you have to judge to see how the first few weeks go. If he is going to actually be in a Taysom Hill role where he's going to get multiple catches, multiple rushes, things like that, maybe he's somebody to consider. But Taysom Hill was not exactly a fantasy relevant player when he wasn't a full-time quarterback, because his production was just so inconsistent from time to time. So if he does happen to fill that kind of role where he's like a gadget player, I just don't see him getting the volume even to have numbers that would be relevant for you. So to me, just do not draft Tim Tebow. I know that there's probably going to be some people that do that, even though he should not be getting drafted. But I'm just putting it out there because it's going to happen. So, yeah. I'm going to talk briefly about the Jaguars' defense, and by briefly, I mean don't draft them at all. They were one of the worst defenses in the league last year. So, yeah, do not take the Jaguars' defense. And then their kicker is Josh Lambo. So Josh Lambo has had some pretty successful seasons before. He's a relatively underrated kicker that is not necessarily well known, but particularly in 2019, he had a very good season. So I think now that the offense is going to be more productive, I could see a situation where Trevor Lawrence, rookie quarterback, young team, still figuring themselves out. They're good at getting down the field, but they're not good at finishing in the red zone. So this means that a lot of opportunity for Josh Lambo to get some field goals, get some points for you, and he's gonna be a guy that almost certainly is going to be available in that last round of the fantasy football draft where I tell you is exclusively for kickers, and you never take kickers any higher than that because you can get kickers like Josh Lambo off waivers, and they can be excellent for you. So my point is, this is an excellent kicker that you want to look at in the last round of the fantasy football draft to consider taking on your team. And the beauty of it is that if it's the last round of the fantasy football draft and he plays poorly, you can just cut him, and it doesn't cost you anything. That's why you wait until the last round to draft a kicker. And if they don't do well, you can just pick up somebody else and just play the stream game week to week. I'm going to make a whole video about kickers. I'm actually really excited to do that because I have a cheat system that is not really talked about, but it's a way to use the kicker position to really set yourself up for success in the rest of your roster. It's mind-blowing. I'm excited to talk about it. So stay tuned. I'm going to go in depth about each position and what I do for them and what you should do with them as well to be successful. So, hope you enjoy this video. The next team I'm going to talk about in alphabetical order is the Kansas City Chiefs. There's going to be a lot to talk about with them. But stay tuned if you're interested in more of these videos, and thank you for your support to the channel. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.